Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the latest row that's blown up in the Home Office as Priti Patel is accused of a power grab in trying to change the law without parliamentary scrutiny in order to more directly control police chiefs. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is apparently trying to rewrite a protocol in order to give herself, as police chiefs put it, new powers without the approval of Parliament. And we've had similar issues with statutory instruments since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. A statutory instrument, sometimes, it's referred to as secondary legislation. It can be used by the government to implement legislation without Parliament, but there are, of course, strict limits. And it's been considered that this form of secondary legislation has been abused a bit by the current government, particularly during the coronavirus lockdowns, because it often meant introducing new criminal offences without Parliament's approval. But some said that was an emergency situation for legislation that was only in force for a limited amount of time, so most people didn't really make that much of a fuss. This would represent changing the law when there is no emergency need to do so. So there's no real reason why you shouldn't refer it to Parliament for scrutiny. The idea of parliamentary scrutiny is even if you imagine a government is acting in the national interest, individuals can still make a poor decision. So you subject it to scrutiny. In point of fact, before I get onto this, which I think is the main thing, the Home Office, of course, another little bit of a stink as well by removing limits on stop and search powers. In fact, a junior minister was on an interview today. You may have actually heard this particular minister talk about the fact that people just need to, if they're struggling with the cost of living, just need to work more hours. That's probably why. But she was supposed to be answering questions about these stop and search powers, and she didn't know anything about them. She knew that something had changed, but she didn't know what. She was asked by the interviewer, so what's changed then? And then she said a thing, and the interviewer said, no, that's not correct. What's changed is this. Oh, yeah, sorry, got it wrong. Maybe they need to work more hours so they understand their own policies. But in terms of having the Home Secretary interfere too much in the work of independent police forces, it can be argued that if the Home Secretary really feels that there are some issues with the current provisions, there should be no problem with just letting Parliament discuss her proposals. Because what's happening here is that Patel wants the power to overrule police leaders. In a report, which I'll link below, the responses from her office is, no, all it's going to do is make clear whose job and responsibility things are in the policing world. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of people think it's already clear, you see. And her spokesperson said, and I quote, should it not be the Home Secretary's role to ask questions? And that one statement tells me that this is definitely a power grab. I don't need to try and work out who's telling the truth here. This is absolutely, regardless of anything else. Because this is the thing. This is how a question works. Home Secretary, right? She writes to a police chief. Actually, or email. Guess on the blow. Do you know what? It's the Home Secretary. A police commissioner or a superintendent or a chief constable, they're going to pick up the phone to the Home Secretary. So she can just ring this senior police officer if she's got questions. And they will answer them. Because that's how it works. Home Secretary questions a police commissioner about a politically sensitive operation, maybe. The police commissioner responds. That's it. That's how questions work. You ask the question, you get your response. Done. What the Home Secretary wants here is to tell that commissioner to act in a specific way, that is counter to their professional instincts. And you wouldn't say that it's reasonable, for example, for the Health Secretary to overrule the clinical decision of a consultant surgeon. It is appropriate for the Health Secretary to go into a hospital and ask questions about the basis on which consultant surgeons make their decisions, so that you have an understanding of the process. Absolutely. But to go in and tell a surgeon, no, you're going to make a completely different clinical decision. You wouldn't say that's reasonable. You wouldn't say it's reasonable for the Education Secretary to overrule the day-to-day decisions of school principals. If the Secretary of State of any department wants organisations within their department to change their practices in law, then they can change the law using the normal parliamentary procedures. And even that's bad enough when you've got a government like the one we have. Because there's a very serious issue at stake here. Never mind the fact that we have a government that routinely breaks the law, both civil and criminal law now. For any government, we need a healthy distance between that government and the police. The police are law enforcement. We need our government to obey the law. Yes, the police are a public body. And of course, the government must rightly have oversight over public bodies. But the police also need to be able to enforce the law free from government interference. So how do you ensure that the government have oversight over the police without control of the police? Well, you can have a say in, first of all, you decide the laws as the government. You can have a say in appointing the most senior officers. But beyond that, they must be operationally independent. As soon as you can direct police operations as a member of the government, you run the risk of a corrupt government having the police do their bidding in order to control the population. Now, let us just imagine, purely hypothetical, of course. Let us imagine you had a corrupt government, like a really corrupt government. A government that was so corrupt that it might even fear legal consequences should they lose the next election. If they fall from power. Let us say that the current system for deciding the government doesn't look like favouring their continued stay in power. That the next election might well bring in a new government politically opposed to them. Might not a corrupt government want to hold on to power by foul means if fair will not work? We saw this with the orange one in the United States, didn't we? An attempted insurrection may have come closer than many would like to admit to allowing that corrupt government to seize power when it had been lawfully displaced. In the case of America, their systems were just about robust enough to resist. I don't know how much margin for error there really was, but they did hold. But there are countries where this hasn't been the case. There have been cases in modern history, cases right now, where this has not been the case. We've seen democracies turn to autocracies within the space of a few years or even months. And when you look at cases where democracies stop being democracies, there are certain steps along the path to supreme power for the autocrats who tread it. And one of them is control of the police. And you read this article, and you may be thinking the Home Secretary, wants to stifle objections to political discussions. There's talk of police chiefs saying they'd be unable to talk to the public about how certain political choices would impact law enforcement, which would be bad enough. But my major concern is what you have is another step towards a corrupt government that looks like it may only have a few years of power, changing the political landscape to secure continued power. If the current system does not allow them to retain power, of course a corrupt government seeks to change that system. In terms of the practical upshot of this story, if police chiefs are claiming that the Home Secretary is likely exceeding her legal rights with this redrafting of the protocol, then it will be a case of challenging it in court. And it may well be that the court finds against the Home Office, then Patel will still have the option of getting Parliament to back her proposals. Doesn't necessarily do anything other than delay. It might finish it off. After all, Patel has already rammed a hugely impactful policing bill through Parliament. It might just be argued that she'll look a little bit silly if she comes up and says we need another one, and there might not be that much time for her to get through more changes before the election. But there are a couple of things to bear in mind even if this is the case. First, the Conservatives are not guaranteed to lose the next election. I'm not even at the point yet where I think they're likely to lose. I think there's too many people forgetting various things that are likely to happen between now and the election that could swing things back the Conservatives' way. I want to see much more support for the opposition before I start thinking that the Conservatives are likely to lose the next election. If the Tories win again, they will have years to introduce much more authoritarian legislation. Second, Tory MPs are worried about their seats. That's it. They clutch their pearls over Boris Johnson's law-breaking and gas, but they don't really care. They only care how it's seen. They care about remaining on the gravy train after the next election. Moves like this are designed to keep the Tories in power. Of course, Tory MPs will vote for them unless there is a massive public backlash. But without the media pointing out what's happening here, there is little chance of that. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button, maybe even click on the join button if you'd be interested in membership. And until next time, I'll see you later.